times the narrative accompanying an artistic creation can be just as captivating as the art piece itself. Occasionally, its genesis forms an integral part of its substance. The tale of the 20th century author Fernando Pessoa and his magnum opus, the Book of Disquiet, exemplifies such an instance, a scenario where its backstory seems like a fictional tale in its own right. Pessoa entered the world in 1888 in Lisbon, Portugal. At the remarkably young age of 5, he was confronted with loss and the transient nature of existence when his father succumbed to tuberculosis. The subsequent year brought further sorrow with the death of his younger brother. Shortly after these events, his mother remarried, leading to the family's relocation to South Africa, a move that also severed Fernando from the familiar landscapes of his formative years. During his period of residence in South Africa, Pessoa achieved fluency in the English language and cultivated a deep appreciation for English literary works. Upon reaching the age of 17, he made a solitary return to Lisbon. It was there he would live out the remainder of his life, dedicating the preponderance of his time to the pursuit of writing. However, by the time of his passing in 1935 at the age of 47, he had brought only a small number of books to publication, most of which garnered little attention. He essentially composed his works in profound obscurity, largely unknown to anyone. And yet he apparently died with the conviction that he was a significant literary talent, or at the very least, that he was destined to become one. In a manner that is almost disconcertingly prophetic, his intuition proved accurate. After his death, Pessoa's extensive body of work, which included the manuscript for the Book of Disquiet alongside tens of thousands of other manuscript pages that are, even to this day, undergoing editorial review, remained concealed within a wooden chest unperceived by the world. It was not until 1982, precisely 47 years after Pessoa's demise and eerily matching the age at which he died, that the Book of Disquiet was discovered and subsequently published. This volume would later be widely acknowledged as one of the most distinct and pivotal literary achievements of the 20th century. Within the book lies a lifetime's accumulation of Pessoa's reflections and contemplative insights concerning reality and dreams, the nature of tedium and selfhood, the inherent absurdity of being and the pointlessness of action, the simultaneous intricacy and simplicity of life, and the fundamental contradiction and paradox at the heart of all things. The book itself is structured as an assemblage of fragmented vignettes, rendered in a style that hovers somewhere between personal diary entries and lyrical poetry. There is no discernible linear sequence to the work, and one could argue that its impact is just as profound whether experienced in reverse order or from beginning to end. Even more curiously, Pessoa does not attribute authorship of any part of it to himself. Instead, it is credited to a gentleman named Bernardo Soares, an assistant bookkeeper from Lisbon, Portugal, and possibly also to another individual known as Vicente Guedes. Guedes and Soares, however, possess no real existence. They are characters whom Pessoa himself invented for the purpose of creating the book. Dispersed throughout the vast collection of Pessoa's manuscript pages are various pseudonyms, fictitious authors to whom he ascribed different pages and compilations. These are not merely alternative pen names, though. They represent distinct personas, each endowed with different writing styles, personalities, perspectives, and fabricated histories. Pessoa designated these authorial characters as heteronyms, and he is known to have written under the guise of approximately 80 such figures throughout his lifetime. Thus, the Book of Disquiet is not precisely a non-fiction work by an anonymous writer, nor can it be accurately categorized as a novel centered on a fictional character or narrative. It resides in an intermediate space. Owing to this unique characteristic, it is frequently described as the most peculiar autobiography ever penned. Pessoa himself characterized it as a factless autobiography, or an autobiography of someone who never truly existed. The book's singular structure and stylistic approach are in many respects an indispensable support for its overarching themes. The utilization of heteronyms appears to underscore a key philosophical motif prevalent throughout the work: the fragmented and illusory constitution of the self. With astonishing accuracy and a poignant sensibility that feels cathartic to engage with, Pessoa throughout the volume frequently describes the intrinsic alienation, disorientation, and solitude that accompany the state of being a person. He wrote, "I don't know how to feel or think or love. I'm a character in a novel as yet unwritten, hovering in the air and undone before I've even existed. Amongst the dreams of someone who never quite managed to breathe life into me. I'm always thinking, always feeling, but my thoughts lack all reason, my emotions all feeling. I'm falling through a trap door, through infinite space, in a directionless, empty fall. My soul is a black maelstrom, a great madness spinning about a vacuum, the swirling of a vast ocean around a hole in the void, and in the waters, more like whirlwinds than waters, float images of all I ever saw or heard in the world. Houses, faces, books, boxes, snatches of music, and fragments of voices, all caught up in a sinister, bottomless whirlpool. And I myself am the center that exists only because the geometry of the abyss demands it. I am the nothing around which all this spins. I exist so that it can spin. I am a center that exists only because every circle has one." For Pessoa, self-understanding, or perhaps more accurately, the attempt to understand the self, is a precipitous plunge down an endless chasm, culminating in a landing that proves fatal. And the inherent impossibility of comprehending and conveying one's internal experiences whilst in this free fall engenders a lifetime marked by disquiet and a sense of disorientation. Throughout the book, Pessoa also frequently explores themes of tedium, futility, and a pervasive sense of meaninglessness. In his view, everything amounts to a kind of delusion. Life itself is a sequence of dreams. I've never done anything but dream. This and this alone has been the meaning of my life. My only real concern has been my inner life, Pessoa recorded. For him, there is no genuine purpose in undertaking or achieving anything. Reality as we perceive it is as deluded, false, and ultimately as meaningful as the several dreams we experienced the previous night, which dissolved upon our awakening, never to be consciously known or pondered again. Life is but a fleeting dream destined to be veiled by the fog of consciousness and forgotten with the arrival of the morning sunrise. Pessoa wrote, "If I write what I feel, it's to reduce the fever of feeling. What I confess is unimportant, because everything is unimportant." The acknowledgement of the utter futility of any action and the concurrent advocacy for a retreat into a dream world serve to reinforce another principal theme within the book: contradiction and paradox. After all, what is the rationale behind writing about the pointlessness of doing anything and the impossibility of ever adequately articulating anything, all while actively engaging in the act of doing and saying things? Perhaps, however, this does not indicate an incoherence on Pessoa's part, but rather it points to what Pessoa himself might have perceived as the utility inherent in paradox. In medicine, certain preventative and preparatory treatments incorporate forms of the bacteria or virus that are the causative agents of the very disease the treatment aims to prevent. Similarly, one could argue that both the creation and consumption of good literature and fine art expose an individual to the virus of being, so that one might hopefully develop sufficient immunity to survive its effects. Perhaps then, in a paradoxical manner, the driving force that compelled Pessoa to create, to write, and to act was the profound awareness that creating, writing, and acting are ultimately pointless. It is also relevant to observe that the Book of Disquiet was left in an unfinished state. With this characteristic, it is almost as if the book itself mirrors Pessoa's philosophical conception of existence, trapped within a chest, truly known only after Pessoa's death, at a point when it could no longer be altered by his hand, interpreted solely through a fragmented collection of vignettes, authored by someone who never existed, and brought to a form of completion by the passage of time, rather than by intentional design. The book itself appears to serve as an almost perfect metaphor for a person. It is an unsettling exercise to consider all of these elements and then to realize that the word Pessoa, his birth name, translates from Portuguese into English as person. If that detail is not sufficiently arresting, perhaps the most confounding aspect of the story surrounding the Book of Disquiet is that it contains passages that seem to prophesize its own fate. Within its pages, Pessoa wrote, "It sometimes occurs to me with sad delight that if one day, in a future I won't be part of, the sentences I write are read and admired, then at last I'll have my own kin, people who understand me, my true family in which to be born and loved. But far from being born into it, I'll have already died long ago. I'll be understood only in effigy when affection can no longer compensate for the indifference that was the dead man's lot in life. Perhaps one day they'll understand that I fulfilled like no one else my instinctive duty to interpret a portion of our century. And when they've understood that, they'll write that in my time I was misunderstood, that the people around me were unfortunately indifferent and insensitive to my work, and that it was a pity this happened to me. And whoever writes this will fail to understand my literary counterpart in that future time, just as my contemporaries don't understand me, because men learn only what would be of use to their great-grandparents. The right way to live is something we can teach only the dead. And naturally, all of this came to pass. It is occurring at this very moment with these words being written and read. We are currently participating in the unfolding of Pessoa's fortune as foretold by himself a century ago. One can only ponder, was this a masterfully constructed stratagem by a genius creative intellect? Was it simply chance? Was it a confluence of both? Or was it something else entirely? Whatever the explanation may be, the story of the Book of Disquiet seems to have become an almost indivisible part of its artistic creation. It evokes an almost mystical, spiritual quality. It feels akin to a sacred text for atheists, a kind of manual for nihilists. It possesses the capacity to, and likely will,